Welcome back to another episode of Christian Natural Health. Today, I'm very pleased to have Dr. David Lipman with us. Dr. Lipman owns Physical Evidence Chiropractic and is a seasoned chiropractic physician who has successfully treated thousands of patients. With deep personal commitment to biooptimization, Dr. Lipman has achieved extraordinary levels of strength, endurance, and overall health well into his 60s. His mission is to share the knowledge and processes that have profoundly benefited his life, helping others achieve optimal health and wellness. Welcome, Dr. Lipman. Thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Dr. Lauren. Thank you for having me here today. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, let's talk about your story. So you're in your 60s and you talk about being stronger than you've ever been before. So tell us what that journey looked like. Like, where were you before you started utilizing some of the techniques that you use now? And how did you get to where you are today?
Yes, great question. So for me, my personal health journey started when I was about 10 years old. I had
Wow.
moved into a new neighborhood. It was sort of the early days of the suburbs in Long Island, and most everybody that moved in were coming from the city or one of the five boroughs. So the physical landscape was the suburbs, but it was still very much a city mentality. And so it was a little bit of a rough neighborhood, sort of like you would more see in the city because it hadn't really, gentrified into the suburbs back then. It's like the early 1960s. And so at 10 years old, I found myself the first day I moved in getting started up with, some kids in the street. And so my initial feeling about, this personal health journey was the idea of becoming strong. My direct neighbor was a few years older than me. His father was in the martial arts, and he sort of got me to understand that through exercise and doing it a certain way, you can become strong, you can grow stronger, and the things that we ate could affect that as well. So he got me off of Captain Crunch and Pop-Tarts and Wonder Bread and into really good food. And he was a butcher, so they have really good quality meat.
Yeah.
And back then they had farm trucks that would come over to the neighborhood and, sell vegetables and stuff. So, the food was there for the taking, but I wasn't interested in that until I had this influence. And so that's how it really started for me. And I just really took to it, working out first thing in the morning and, eating to support that strength effort. And so, again, my initial motivation was to just try to not be a victim by, some of the rougher kids in the street. But then as that started to grow, it kind of got more in me. And I really was fascinated with how the body can do things when you do certain things to it or with it. And so that's kind of the basis or foundation that stayed with me throughout my life. I wasn't supposed to become a chiropractor. I was being groomed for a family business that was multi-generational, started by my great-grandfather, then my grandfather, my father, and I was being groomed at a young age to do it. And then when I was 15, I had a motorcycle injury and I had broken my neck in two spots. And ultimately, it was a chiropractor that helped me out. And like, it's one of those things that, you have like one instant in your life that all of a sudden you realize like your life is moving in a little different direction than you thought it was going to be. So of course, becoming a chiropractic physician and learning all about the body gave me a more in-depth look at, biochemistry and how our bodies function, at that cellular level. And it was just always so fascinating to me. So, fast forward to, through my 20s and 30s and 40s and 50s and now 60s, I've had decades of time to sort of keep investing in what I call the incline of my health versus just managing the decline, which is kind of what the model is for everybody else. And so as time's gone on and I've learned more, I was willing to get some more of these modalities that really get down to the basic unit of function to optimize that, which is our cells. And the energy production at the cell level being optimized is how we do that. In fact, I found out a couple of years back that we've identified over 32,000 diseases in humans. And the one common denominator is that each one have a reduction or loss of energy production at the cell level, which says to me, we have one issue with 32,000 plus symptoms. And so that, is more my working model in my head for how I live my lifestyle and how I try to share this information as a resource to my patients.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love the fact that your expectation is that you can continue to get better because that's so opposite the messaging of our society. Everybody, I see people that are like as young as their mid 30s who are like, oh, well, it's downhill from here, kind of a thing. And it's just,
They tell you that. They tell you
yeah, it's
that.
so crazy that that's the expectation. So, how much, before we get into all the specifics, how much do you think mindset plays a role in this of what you expect?
That's a great question. And I think a lot of what shaped me was that exact thing. Since I started working out at 10, and nobody was working out in the late 60s, early 70s. We played sports in the street, we rode our bikes, but nobody was organized working out. That was like a fringe thing. It
Right.
hadn't
Yeah.
become mainstream. And
Mhm.
so by the time I was, 16 and 17, I
Mhm.
was fairly developed as a teenager compared to, my peers. And like my dad and his friends were in their 40s at the time, and there's this one particular guy on the block, and he was kind of a loudmouth, nice guy, but just kind of, know-it-all kind of loudmouth. He was like, "Oh, I used to look like you when I was your age, but after 40, it's all downhill."
Yeah.
That was a motivation to me to not be that guy.
Good for you.
That's the mindset that was why I was like, okay, I don't want to end up this way. I don't believe we
Right.
have to. I think it's up to us. And
Mhm.
so mindset is huge because that was my deep belief then and continues to be because it's
Right.
proven itself again and again and again and again throughout my life. And
Right.
I see guys that are even older than me
Mhm.
that have invested in themselves, and I
Yeah.
see what their lifestyles are like and the quality of their life. Guys in their 70s and even 80s. So
Mhm.
it lets me know that it's possible as long as you're willing to make this investment and have that mindset that you can continue to go on. You just have to be willing to do it. I think it's a small price to pay to feel great every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also think that part of the benefit of having that mindset is if you don't believe it's possible, of course, not only are you not going to do the things that you need to do to get there, but you're not going to do the research in order to investigate what are the new tricks and tools that you can utilize that might help you in that process, which I assume is part of why you got into all the biohacking that you do now, right?
Yes, I call it biooptimization. And again,
Biooptimization.
drilling it down, Doc, it's just us giving our bodies what it needs to do its best healing, its best regeneration.
Mhm.
Because in this contemporary world that we live in, where the environment's at war with us every day, our bodies, between the toxins, the lack of nutrition in the food, the other things that they've put into us and around us that get into us. So the way I see it, we have to do a regular daily thing of, you know, trying to remove the obstacles to our health and fortify the deficiencies, but we have to identify what those are. And you can't do absolutely everything, but you
Right.
can do a lot of things to at least keep your, inclination of health and fitness and well-being on an incline instead of just either static or just, slowly declining. So I
Mhm.
think that's what I've learned that's possible
Mhm.
from, my experiences so far. I'm
Right.
64. It used to sound old. I remember my grandparents in the 60s, they seemed old, but I don't
Sure.
feel that way. So
Right. That's great.
it's mindset there, but it's also, like you said, what you're willing to do. And if you believe in it, that you invest in these things, you do these things. And I'm constantly trying to learn as much as I can because fortunately, new things come out all the time that you
Right.
can, take a look at and decide if you want to implement.
Right. Yeah. And I like what you just said about you don't have to do everything because I think that also for certain personalities,
It's
especially,
daunting.
there
Yeah.
tends to be an overwhelm of you have to do all of these things absolutely perfectly. And then if you kind of fall off the wagon, then you just give up completely. But it doesn't have to be that way. And it shouldn't, like if it becomes a stressor, now it's detrimental. But how do you strike that balance between, trying to do all of these things to optimize versus enjoying the life that you've enabled yourself to live.
So that's a really good question. For me, because it's been a lifelong pursuit, it's
Right.
very easy. And
Yeah.
my personality makeup, I like having structure.
Yeah.
And so it's easy for me to implement structure. So, back when I was younger, I'd work out first thing in the morning, which at that time was 6 in the morning.
Mhm.
Now it's 4 in the morning to start
Wow.
with superhuman protocol and then go work out and
Right.
and then still get to work by 7 a.m. So,
Sure.
the hours have changed, but the mindset of where am I going to put this in the
Mindset.
structure of my day? And
Sure.
so that's where I'm always trying to see, especially where I find something new that I know I want to continue to keep in my lifestyle and
Mhm.
and for the most part offer it here at the office too for other people. So it's always easier for me because I already had that head start. The challenge is, and as you point out, people are different. So when I assess a new patient, I'm
Mhm.
trying to understand how do I meet them where they are
Right,
and where can I get them started with a couple of baby steps,
right,
just enough to start making them feel a difference.
right.
Because once people start feeling differently, that usually is a motivator. And the one thing that I've noticed the most is that the people that are the most motivated are the ones that have lost some quality of life
Right.
because they haven't gotten a handle on how they feel and why they feel that way. And
Mhm.
again, many times there's multiple layers to that, of course. And as you must know this, of course, as a holistic practitioner, you're sometimes having to really get to the foundational stuff before you can even consider biohacking
Oh
because
yeah,
there's too much
right.
stuff to unwind before you can even get there.
Hmm.
And so, I'm also understanding that, and you kind of get good at it. You kind of get to see people's personalities and where they're starting, if they're willing to open up about their lifestyle, but most importantly, how willing are they to make
Right,
those kinds of changes that that they have to make. But
right. Yeah, that makes sense. So,
yeah.
and you were talking about the foundation of everything is the cell. So, can you give us a brief overview of what does that look like, cellular energy, ATP, mitochondria, and why is that so critical for the starting place?
So it's critical because again, it's the basic unit of functioning in every part of our body. So regardless of what the tissue is or the organ system, it's always starting at the cell level. That's where we function, in that basic unit. And making energy for the cell is how that cell's function goes on and
Mhm.
continues. And the fact is that we need oxygen and we need certain nutrients for those processes to create, what's called ATP, this adenosine triphosphate, that is the energy outcome of each one of our cells. And the fact is that there's so many things in our environment that can make or break that process. As an example, the amount of toxicity that we now live with in this modern world, those of us that live in the city or the suburbs, maybe not so much in some of the more rural areas that haven't been touched yet,
Mhm.
but we have so many things that cause free radical damage, molecules out there that get inside our cells and start to do damage because they're, robbing us of an electron and causing an early degenerative state of that cell. Those same, compounds, these free radicals, will stop oxygen from getting into the cell. And when oxygen is not present for energy production, the amount of energy going on is it's not horsepower, but think of it as 2 horsepower when oxygen is not present and we're making energy. But when oxygen is present, it's like 36 horsepower. So again, it's not horsepower, but it's about 16 times more energy production when oxygen's present. So there's so
Right.
many things, just as a basic example, that prevent oxygen from coming in to make that energy. So just by being able to mitigate that, and red light is one really big and easy way to do that because it basically kicks out those free radicals from what's called the electron transport chain, and then be able to get that oxygen in to rev up that ATP production. And when you have a cell that's functioning with optimal energy production, that cell is functioning optimally. And so is that tissue and that system and whatever it's responsible to make, hormones or neurotransmitters or whatever,
Right.
it's that. So that's a big one.
Hmm.
And so many people are walking around not realizing they're just not getting enough oxygen into their cells.
Right.
Some of it's because they're just not getting enough breathing going on. A lot of people are shallow breathers. A lot of
Right.
people live inside instead of getting outside into the fresh air. Our moms were right. We need to get out and have the fresh air. When we were
Right.
kids, we thought they were
Absolutely.
just trying to kick us out of the house.
Uh-huh.
But it's the fact that God put all this stuff here for us: the light from the sun, the grounding from the earth, and the oxygen that we breathe. The breath of life is there, and I mean that's not an old story. That's a continued story. That's how we exist, and that optimizes us at the cell level. I can go on more, but let me break for a
Yeah.
second.
All right, sure. So let's go into the oxygen a little bit more. So there's a lot of nuance here, right? As far as like how well, like is more always better? Are there circumstances in which we need to kind of be careful? How do like straight up oxygen therapies work? Where do they fit compared to just optimizing cellular function first?
Yeah, well, actually, that's how they do fit by optimizing cellular function.
Mhm.
Um, as an example, uh, about 3.5, a little more, 3.5 years ago, we got what's called a superhuman protocol here in the office.
Mm.
I had already had the red light therapy, a full body red light bed, and I was familiar with the technology because I had been using a class 4 deep tissue laser for injury treatment that sped up healing for a long time. So I understood the science of what's called photobiomodulation, or how
Mm.
light affects cells and upgrades energy production. So when the same company came out with this full body thing, I was like, I'm getting that for me. I don't even care if
Yeah,
nobody else uses it.
sure.
So I did. And within a few years, I heard a podcast or watched a podcast that involved a fellow named Ed Milet. He's got a big podcast out there, and he was interviewing Jason Tabot, who's the CEO of Da Vinci Medical. And it was Jason that trademarked the term superhuman protocol because he
Oh.
had combined a pulsed electromagnetic field,
Mhm.
exercise with oxygen therapy, and then red light therapy on one particular occasion in that order. And then he went and did a leg workout at the gym. And all of a sudden, his energy is through the roof and his strength has gone up significantly. And then he's like, what just happened? And
Right.
he, brilliant guy, he reverse engineered what he had done that day that he had never done before, hence the superhuman protocol, which again is optimizing the body's ability to not only carry oxygen by the red blood cells, that's one of the effects of the pulsed electromagnetic field, but it does also other things cellularly to help the cellular communication, bringing nutrients into the cell through the membrane, removing waste products. But as it pertains to the superhuman, optimizing our red blood cells to carry oxygen. So when we're doing step 2 and we're exercising with 98% oxygen purity as we breathe through a mask and do a series of sprints on a bike, or we use a Bowflex stepper here. But the key is you want to be breathing that higher quality oxygen while you're exercising, and then do some sprints to create that oxygen debt, which is going to force the partial pressure of oxygen to increase, really saturating your tissues. And then with all that oxygen, you go into the red light. And again, that's going to drive it into the cell.
Right.
So what we see in terms of, let's say, as a therapeutic value is back, in 2020, 2021, and even 22, so many people were suffering from long haul COVID symptoms, myself included. I mean, I got it very badly in 2020, and I was, getting out of breath just walking to the second floor of my house, and that was never me.
Right.
And within about 3 weeks of doing Superhuman, I mean, not only was that gone, but my endurance was higher than it was in decades.
Mhm.
I remember sprinting up. We were at the Miami airport. It was about 300 or 400 steps to get up to the trailer, the train that takes you from terminal to terminal. And
Mhm.
I sprinted up that a month into Superhuman. That was after having long haul COVID symptoms. And
Wow.
I barely got out of breath at the top of that. That
Right.
let me know that this thing is a real thing and it works. It made me feel like, you know what? I've got 12 or 16 cylinders and I've always been, firing about 4 or 5.
Yeah.
That's the feeling. So getting back to the question, so many of us can benefit just from a wellness standpoint about having just more oxygen and energy production in our cells. Then again, of course, with things like traumatic brain injuries and other things that cause deficits, you can get so much benefit from either doing hyperbaric oxygen, or I think more importantly, if you're able to get your hands on the superhuman, which combines those 3 modalities, you're going to get oxygen to these more distal tissues that probably haven't been getting them in a very long time.
Mhm. So, all right, if let's say somebody has mitochondrial dysfunction because of toxicity, for example,
Hmm.
you give massive, really high percentage oxygen to those people. Now you've got the electrons from that oxygen that are going into the electron transport chain, right? But if
Hmm.
the mitochondria are under functioning, aren't you going to get a bottleneck where some of those electrons leak out and create more oxidative stress?
Yes.
How do you protect against that?
So that's a great question. So one of the more recent things, and it's been around for over 100 years, is methylene blue.
Okay.
Methylene blue is known for its ability to at the last port, one of the last ports of the electron transport train. There's these 4 sites
Mhm.
that promote the next level of converting NAD and so on into ultimately ATP.
Right.
And the methylene blue will actually act as almost like a spark plug to those first 3 of those 4 sites, and red light will drive that last one. So
Mhm.
combining methylene blue is a great way to just get over that metabolic syndrome, because it's displacing the stuff that's blocking and getting in the way, those free radicals and those toxins, and getting that system to, charge. It's like a spark plug in an engine. That's how it functions. So fortunately, that's something that came around more recently, even though it's been around for over 100 years with different uses. So that's a really good way, and we've seen a lot of success with that here.
Right. And so under what circumstances you didn't mention that as part of the superhuman protocol. Under what circumstances do you add methylene blue in, or do you always? Or nearly
We
always?
we don't. Again, it depends on the patient.
Sure.
With somebody that's coming in more with a deficit, those are one of the things that we'll talk about.
Mhm.
We also we'll look at, some of the genetic profile for, processing nutrients like the methylation
Right.
cycle. It's a big one. I mean, every one of us should know that about ourselves.
Sure.
It affects our entire life in nutrition. Every pediatrician should be running that, and every child, day one, through a saliva test. I'm sorry, cheek swab test.
Mhm.
So that's a big one. Looking at micronutrients, so not looking at the typical medical blood panel where they show you in your bloodstream, here's your vitamin D, your vitamin A,
Mhm.
your magnesium, potassium, but actually looking inside the cell.
Mhm.
Because the fact is when we look inside the bloodstream, we're looking at like the last 72 hours of our life. We're not looking at the more long term. So when you look inside the cell, you're looking at about 6 months worth. So that's where you can really see the inefficiencies, some related to the methylation and some just to diet. So
Mhm.
that's another big place where so many people are suffering from, quote unquote symptoms. And it's malnutrition because we're not getting what we need for those various reasons. And so that's a big one many times to just start foundationally with that.
Mhm.
Sometimes food sensitivities, which can overwhelm our immune systems, as you know, because now our immune systems are sitting there fighting food that we're eating because that we're sensitive to, as opposed to just
Right.
focusing on what it should be. So it's an overworked immune system. That's going to cause stress on the whole system there too. So all of those things are also figuring into the mix,
Yeah.
in terms of that, in terms of just saying, hey, this person needs methylene blue.
Sure.
Um, so that's, again, you got to look at the individual and different layers that are going
Yeah,
on.
right. So kind of big picture naturopathic medicine, our philosophy is you can identify and remove obstacles to cure that are in the environment, get you in a healthy environment where everything is conducive to health. You've got all of the building blocks that are necessary for health, and then you can boost vitality kind of next. There's a therapeutic order in which you do things. And I think that's what you're referring to, this idea of you look at the individual, you don't necessarily jump straight to the superhuman deep dive protocol for somebody where their diet is crap and they're not, they're not eliminating and they're not sleeping. And like you get those foundations
Yeah.
first. And
Yep.
and after you've done all of that work, it's like want to squeeze a tube of toothpaste from the bottom, not start from the top,
Right.
essentially.
Right. Sure.
Right.
Great. Great. That's a great analogy. I'm going to use that one.
Absolutely. I'm sure I didn't make it up, but so okay. So then, for somebody that is doing this protocol, can you talk a little bit more about the pulsed electromagnetic field therapy, the PEMF therapy, and how that or frequencies rather, and how that kind of combines with the rest of this? And is that like specific frequencies that you're using? Or there's because my understanding of electromagnetic frequencies is that some of them are really beneficial and some of them can be potentially dangerous and they're not that far off. So how do you know which ones to use and which ones not to?
So great question. So let's just get to the, what's the significance of
Right.
pulse electromagnetic field?
Yeah.
So we have all been created, our physical bodies, we're a biophysical entity, and so is our planet Earth.
Right.
We know that gravity exists, so there's an electromagnetic pull, but the Earth has also been responsible to keep our own plus and minus charges recharged every day in the proper polarity. Both the Earth and our bodies are low level frequencies of electromagnetic energy.
Mhm.
Contrasting that kind of with what you just said, with all this electricity that's around us, our grid, our wireless networks, our devices, our 5G, those are high frequency. That's where the disruption happens to our normal physiology that's supported by the Earth. But here again, most of us are not walking on the earth. We're living on concrete slabs. We wear rubber soles. So we're not getting that. Plus, the worst part of it in these last 30 years, how much of this, high frequency energy is around us? It's like we've adopted this technology, without even thinking about the long-term results. And, now, fortunately, more and more people are taking a look at their devices, getting those blockers, blocking, entire homes from that negative high electromagnetic frequency energy, and even, blocking them from your devices and, not charging your phone by your head at night.
Right.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
So those are the things that are now in this modern world, things that we didn't really have to deal with 100 years ago,
Right.
because we didn't have all these interruptions and the things that, the earth was supporting us. Excuse me. So the concept of the low level electromagnetic field as the first step of the superhuman protocol. And incidentally, you can get the same effect by walking barefoot on the beach or the grass, for a half hour.
Is it
Um,
the Schumann resonance? Is that what you use?
yeah, yeah, of course.
Ah, okay.
It's what the earth is. Listen,
All right.
God made the earth. He made it exactly the way we need to have it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
that's yeah, that's where it is. And so again, only in this contemporary world have we dealt with this kind of issue. We really
Right.
never did for centuries. And so now, as it pertains again to the superhuman protocol, we're getting our physiology to where all of the functions physiologically of how our cells communicate with each other, how our cells bring nutrients in from the bloodstream and remove waste products through that same cell membrane, and how our red blood cells are carrying oxygen as an example. And you can look this up online. If you just Google PEMF effect on RBCs, you're going to see two pictures. You're going to see one where you have these big round red blood cells, and it's on a slide, but you could see them, and they're all away from each other because they're all negatively charged. And if you put two negative poles of a magnet together, you can't make them touch. They're going to repel each other. That's the proper polarity of our red blood cells. So as they go through the bloodstream, number one, they're very big, so they have big surface area to carry oxygen, and number two, they're not touching each other.
Mhm.
Now, the one on the left you'll see is that the effect of all these EMFs, the high frequency ones, it shrinks the red blood cells and they clump together. It
Mhm.
makes the blood thicker, and they
Yeah.
do not carry oxygen well to our tissues in that state. So
Mhm.
the PEMF will take that state and bring it to the proper state. And we've actually had the opportunity to have a live cell. Like we've had people who do a blood stain on a slide,
Mhm.
see that sort of stagnant, all clumped up stuff, put them for 15 minutes on the PMF, redo it, and it's all open and big. I mean,
Interesting.
we had the opportunity to do that a few times, and it's really, I mean, when you see it on yourself, it's very impactful. But then you
Sure.
really understand, is this how I'm normally walking around? How can I possibly getting enough oxygen and getting energy into my cells,
Right.
being produced if this is my state?
Mhm.
Now, you can get this superhuman effect by, let's say going to the beach if you're nearby the beach,
But I
walk
was
on the beach,
thinking, yeah.
yeah, do deep breathing and get those early sun rays that are causing that
Yep.
same, version, just
Right.
like, just let me talk about light for 1 second. Just like plants and trees and grass grows from photosynthesis from the sun,
Mhm.
that same effect is in our own cells. Our mitochondria can absorb that's infrared light coming from the sun to do exactly what red light does. But this was put here for us, for our existence to
Right.
support us. The natural world that was created for us has supported us. It's just this more contemporary world that we've kind of had an effect on, not always so good,
Yeah.
is causing us a lot of harm in those ways.
Yeah. So it's like the superhuman protocol is essentially like a high-tech version of going for a run on the beach or something
Yep.
like that
Right.
in the early morning
Yes.
kind of a thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's fantastic. Very cool. So for somebody who is EMF sensitive, they usually feel much better if they're grounding. So I'm assuming the PEMF therapy will actually be beneficial for those people as well, right?
Absolutely. I've had many patients that they're forced to be indoors on a computer for, majority of their day. And many people since the pandemic have, gone to the home office, situation.
Right.
I've recommended to anybody that does that under any circumstances to get a grounding mat at the very least, which is simply something that you can have underneath you that plugs into the wall. And of course, all of our electricity is grounded to the earth. So through that grounding mat, you're able to tap into the earth and you're getting that ground. So instead of sitting there getting the EMFs all day, you're getting clearance of them. And then, of course, the actual pulse electromagnetic field that emits its own is a really good thing. And I've had many patients get that for their own home as well. They sleep on them,
Right.
in fact.
Yeah. So, slight devil's advocate for a second. I've had
Yeah,
some patients who do the grounding mats who feel like this is amazing. I have superpowers. I've had other people who feel worse. And my understanding is in that situation, part of what's going on is that the electrical ground is not necessarily the same thing as the actual earth ground. And there could be dirty electricity that contaminates it, which makes
yes.
them an antenna. So what do we do about that? How do you determine who's who? And who's going to get benefit from this versus who might, even if they don't necessarily feel awful right away, how do we know that in their environment this is beneficial versus not?
Yeah, no, great question. And sometimes it's hard. We have something called a tri-field where we can actually measure
Yeah.
the levels of EMFs in somebody.
Yeah.
And most of us, if we're in a normal range, we'll be somewhere like 7 or 10. I've had people in the 200s.
Mhm.
Um, I've had patients that they say electronics stop functioning when they're around. So, as you point out, there's definitely certain people, and I don't know exactly what the mechanism of how that happens is. I
Right.
do know one person that actually doesn't have any electricity in their house because they are so sensitive they can't even have lights in their house, because, electricity, that's how sensitive they are.
Yeah.
So that's an extreme example of that. And I don't know if where on the earth, you call home, how that affects it, because, there's different vortexes where there's, very, very high electromagnetic fields that are, part of the earth, like in Sedona, Arizona. And I
Mhm.
think the Yucatan Peninsula, and there's other places
Mhm.
where that field is so strong that people have a very tangible and visceral effect from that, some more than others.
Yeah.
So just getting back to the question, I think one of the things is that you probably have to get a chance to see if you have no idea, trying the grounding and doing it that way, or simply going outside and
Right.
make yourself barefoot on the ground for a week or two straight, and
Yeah.
you'll know right then and there if that's good. If you don't get that same effect from a grounding mat, maybe it's not for you, or
Right.
maybe you have an opportunity to try an actual pulsed electromagnetic field where you can control the frequencies,
Mhm.
because maybe certain people function at certain frequencies better than others. And again, this is not science that they've really got a good handle on. It's
Right.
it's it's more recent. They do know it's important and it's effective, but
Right.
I say nobody's going to have a problem walking on the earth. That's
That's
like your best
exactly
bet
it.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. I've had some people who are very, I mean, obviously part of being electromagnetically sensitive is the electric fields from anything plugged in, which would mean any kind of a mat as well, potentially.
Hmm.
So for those people, yeah, go stand on the earth. And especially if you're off grid on the earth, there's a very small percentage of people that I've also seen where in their particular environment, it seems like the power company is dumping into the ground outside. So they actually feel worse grounding where they are too.
Wow.
It's just a matter of if you can get really far away from, like on the beach, for example, where there's nothing around, then
Right.
you know that you're getting the pulsed magnetic fields from that God intended, plus the fact that the earth is very electronegative and you can end up kind of, it'll donate electrons to you for the sake of your mitochondria if you need.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So,
We
so
even have we have a section here in sort of Central Florida
mhm,
that there's high tension, power plants and stuff, and they've known for years that it's a little enclave of cancer in those areas because of people's exposure.
yeah.
Unfortunately, the statute of limitations on revealing that to a new resident, like realtors no longer have to mention that anymore, even though they've known about it. They kind of established the statute of limitation by bringing that information out, but of course they didn't publicize it very well, just enough to make a public service announcement.
Oh,
But
no.
there's probably pockets of this around the
Sure.
country that are just like this, and most people really don't know. The government knows about this; they have for a long time, but most people don't understand the impact that it has on their health.
Sure. Oh man, that's horrible.
Yeah.
So, changing gears a little bit. So,
Yeah.
I know very little about stem cell therapy. So, can you tell us a little bit? That's something that you do as well, right? Stem cells?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Uh, okay.
Again, as everything for me, it started with myself. 2 summers ago, I was diagnosed with sort of a bone-on-bone situation in my right shoulder. It was dislocated when I was 5, and then from exercising since I'm 10 years old, being a chiropractic physician, which is very manual, I put a lot of stress into
Sure.
it.
Of
And it
course.
got into the point where about for 2 years I was finding like I couldn't do pull-ups anymore, or push-ups, and like even putting on my shirt was painful, sleeping on my side. So I finally went to an ortho that I trusted, got an x-ray, and sure enough, you could see, there was like a bone on bone. There wasn't any joint space there. And I even with certain movements, I felt grinding, but my mobility had started to really diminish. And even the muscle atrophy was very apparent too. So I had tried PRP, which is platelet-rich plasma. It's tried it about 3 times. Kind of helped a little, but not really.
Right.
And then I tried some ozone shots, which again helped a little bit, but not really the kind of help that I was going to be able to stave off this thing. So I
Mhm.
had spoken to a few of my patients that had gone out of the country, like Costa Rica and Panama, to do stem cell therapy, costing like 20, 25, $30,000.
Mhm.
And so, I was looking at that and weighing out possibly doing that just because I just didn't want to get a shoulder replacement because I
Right.
wanted functionality. And
Sure.
then I was fortunate at the end of 2023 to find a lab or tissue bank in Texas that supplied the same type of umbilical cord stem cells that people going out of the country for. Now, up to this point, and this law is going to be going into effect here in the state of Florida on July 1st, that's really opened up a lot more in the way of application to utilize stem cells because right now it's been kind of the Wild West. It
Right.
hasn't gotten the blessing from the FDA, and a lot of people are afraid to do it because they don't want to get in trouble. But for
Mhm.
me, for myself, I said, something. If this is something that's going to help me, I'm doing it. And that was my attitude.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you something. Within 3 or 4 weeks of that, first thing I noticed is that it wasn't grinding anymore. Second thing is I found that my range of motion is better. Like I wasn't even able to reach like to wash my underarm on my other side. I couldn't even like reach across to do that. And I
Mhm.
was starting to see these functional things in my everyday life change. And
Yeah.
so over about a 6 week and then a 3 month and then a 6 month process, it got better and better and better. And I continued to bring in a few more treatments for myself. Last year I did 3 months in a row because I find when you do it as a loading phase, the
Mhm.
amount of regenerative power that your body can have is tremendous. Now, granted, this is the only thing I knew about. This was my reason for doing it. But if
Right.
I had liver damage or heart damage or kidney damage or something else that I wasn't even aware of, these cells are going to, through what's called cell signaling, going to
Mhm.
find those areas and help to regenerate and replace them.
Mhm.
We're all born with this. These cells are the things that grow us in the womb, and
Right.
then they are responsible to get us from infancy to adulthood and then fix things along the way. It's just that by the time we're 38, 40 years old, the rate of degeneration in our body from wear and tear starts to exceed the amount of regeneration. This is a way to refill that tank so
Mhm.
we can have that higher level of power of regenerating. And
Mhm.
fortunately, we're able to, as humans, utilize a newborn's cells that just missed getting into that baby that was born. It's always a scheduled C-section.
Right.
That baby had the supply from the mom's placenta, and then when the baby's born, they cut that supply off, but those cells are still present and they can be used because there's no DNA in them for
Right.
somebody like you and I that are just trying to just upgrade our regenerative power. And we've just seen so many great things happen, not
Mhm.
just with myself, because that was my win, my shoulder, but patients that have been in pain for years. A woman in January, she was thrown from a horse and she fractured her pelvis in 3 places. She came in at the beginning of February with a walker, a lot of pain. I mean, tremendous amount
Yeah.
of pain. She did a double dose the first time. About 2 weeks later, she did another dose. And after that first dose, she started a month of red light therapy, just red light therapy on top of it. Well, third stem cell was in early March. About March 20th, she started riding a horse again. That's
Oh,
after a triple pelvic fracture in January.
see.
I
Wow.
mean, that's the kind of stuff that we don't tend to see because this isn't mainstream. If our medical community had been utilizing this, we'd
Right.
see things like that. That would be the norm. My
Mhm.
attitude is that everybody over 40 should start doing this just as a matter of prevention and course for just taking care of the wear and tear of the first 40 years of life and preparing us to be able to have more resilience for the next 20 or 40 or whatever God has us here
Yeah.
for.
Yeah. So, question with respect to, I'm not, I don't know anything about this one way or the other, but my expectation might be that
Mhm.
stem cells, because they're pluripotent and they can turn into anything, is there a risk that they might become cancerous? Is there a way that we can prevent that from happening? Or is that
So
even an issue at all?
But I think the important thing is most people don't really understand what cancer really is.
Okay.
Most cancer is not genetic. I mean, they've always touted it that it's some kind of genetic mutation.
Right.
What's really the mutation that happens is the way a cell is making energy. We're going to go back to that ATP production.
Sure.
And the fact is a cancer cell is making energy with only glucose and no oxygen present. And it
Mhm.
changes the whole dynamic of how that energy system works,
Right.
causing and leading to mutations in that cell.
Uh-huh.
But they've done studies where they've taken mitochondria from cancerous cells and put them into healthy cells and those healthy cells become
Sure.
cancerous.
Interesting.
Vice versa, too. They took healthy mitochondria, put into cancer cells, and it restored them. So
Yeah.
it's the way that those cells are making energy that are more of the issue
Mhm.
than the genetics of the cell itself.
Got
And
it.
most of these processes are really utilizing exosomes, which are these extra vesicular cell types. They're smaller particles that stem cells will secrete, and they're really responsible for the signaling to find where in the body needs them, needs the protein payload for them to deliver. They're like little Amazon drivers with the Amazon packages to
Yeah.
find out exactly, what's the address we have to go to. And
Maybe. Yeah.
that's kind of a good analogy in modern day
Yeah.
to
Right.
understand how they function.
Sure. So it would have made, I was assuming based on your story that when you do injections of stem cells into a specific area like your shoulder, they're going to get the localized signaling of we want you to become the cartilage for, to regenerate right here. But you're saying that if they were to ingest it, do it IVs, I assume just injection in general, that they then seek out anywhere in the body that is damaged and they get the signal to become that? Is that the way that works?
Yes, in fact, I never did a direct injection into my shoulder. I did it systemically with an IV push.
Okay.
And that's how, except for two occasions where we had one knee and one shoulder,
Okay.
everybody's been doing it as an IV push. And all the symptoms that they were hoping to, mitigate were all happened, various parts of the body. And again, for me, even the things that are subclinical that I don't even know might be going on for me, why wouldn't I want those things to be addressed before they become clinical?
Sure.
And so that's why, and I was fortunate because the first time I didn't know what was going to happen. I was going to take a chance, but it worked. Even though it wasn't a local shot to the shoulder, it absolutely worked
So
because of, the power of what they're able to do.
sure. Did you notice anything else, like any unexpected? Oh, that was a nice bonus.
Couple of things I don't want to mention one of them here, but the other things that I will tell you is that my sleep
Mm,
had become extremely deep where and again, I'm 64. I haven't slept through the night without getting up once since I'm probably in my late 20s.
mhm,
So on a regular basis, four days a week, pretty solid. I sleep through the night, like 7.5 straight hours.
mm,
And that's something new to me
mhm.
for a very long time. I will also mention one thing is that I had been tracking an increasing PSA over the last few years. So I'm getting it checked every 6 months.
Right.
After my stem cell therapy, exosome therapy, those numbers started to go down,
Wow. Amazing.
which was really amazing. So,
Yeah,
because I was tracking, I wanted to make sure I was staying on top of it. And it was
sure.
every 6 months, literally. So, but after that, and I've done subsequent treatments, each time the numbers are getting lower and lower.
Really cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So, what have I not asked you that you want to make sure you leave with our audience?
Um, I think the concept is that we have to really learn more about how our bodies function because we can't just think about living life as we want to, and then when something breaks down, that the doctor's going to fix us. The doctor's not going to fix us. We have to be our own self-care providers. We don't need a primary health. We need to be our own primary health care provider. And of course, it takes education. You and I, because we've been educated on how the body works, we're at an advantage, but then we can become as a resource to people to teach them more about the body that they're walking around in. I tell my patients all the time, I say, look, you're walking around that body every day. What you do every day to that body is going to have way more effect than I could ever possibly have.
Mhm.
So you have to be willing to, as I said earlier, invest in the incline of your health instead of just manage the decline because there's no third direction. And
Right.
even though it's not been our business model for the medical community in the last 40, 50 years, there's enough information out there now and resources like yourself and myself and other practitioners that can really help people learn how to make those changes. They just have to be willing to do it. And I think that's the most important thing for all of us to take, more control of our health because there's so much that we can do to do that.
Some very cool. Where can people go who want to learn more about you and what you do?
Well, we have a URL that's physicalevidenceconnect.com.
Mhm.
PhysicalEvidenceConnect.com could take you to a little form fill where you can put in your information, your name. There's a drop-down menu to ask about any of the particular topics we have here, but there's also a custom box that you can just type any question. That'll come directly to me. We could start with a conversation, and I've been doing this, quite a bit, and it's nice because there's certain things I can still do remotely that can still, benefit people. And many times I'll also try to find a practitioner near them that might think along some of the lines that I do, or something similar, so they can have a local resource as well. Because I think that's important to be able to try to match people with some local people that they can at least have some face to face with. And I even look for people that might have superhuman protocol or red light therapy or some of the other modalities that we have here. So we're also Boca Raton Chiropractor on Instagram and TikTok. Don't go to TikTok because the girls make me do these stupid dances and it's just very embarrassing. And I'm really not that good at it. But Boca Raton Chiropractor on Instagram will give you some insight to some of the things we do, and to try to be funny but also bring education to people. And it's also on our Facebook, Boca Raton Chiropractor.
Well, I will link to that in the show notes. And thank you so much, Dr. Lipman. This has been really educational. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. I really enjoyed speaking with you today.
Absolutely.